It was a two-letter word. Huh? If, I-F. Well, you know, I blathered and talked quite a bit about that last week. And the thought occurred to me not too long after I gave that lesson. And it was a question. And this is a question, you know, you always pose maybe to yourself. What if I, or you, what if I don't get to heaven? Does that put a little more importance to that little two-letter word? What if I don't get to heaven? I tried and tried, but it just wasn't good enough. Maybe you should ask the question yourself, why wasn't it good enough? Or what did I lack? What didn't I do? What did I do to keep me from getting there? What if I misunderstood? There's all sorts of things that you can apply that word to. But that's one right there, that question, what if I don't get to heaven? Gee whiz, part of the reason why I'm standing up here is hopefully to say something to somebody that might drag you out of whatever kind of situation you find yourself in. It would prevent you from getting to heaven. And one of the main people that I speak to about this is myself. I mean, I don't exclude myself from my lessons. I'm probably harder on myself than I am anybody else that listens to whatever I have to say. So, and I think to say otherwise, I'd think you'd think I was a liar. But I am very hard on myself about this sort of thing. So, with that being the case, I wanted to start this morning's lesson with a couple of just a couple of verses. And if you would, turn over to Philippians. And I'll always remember, if I get over here, I'll always remember being at a racetrack. One Sunday morning, it was at Texas World Speedway, and there was a young man over there. We were in the pits. In the pits is where they don't race. That's just where everybody prepares bikes and stands back and listens and stuff. So I see this guy over there in a pickup, and I just barely knew this guy. And he was sitting over in the pickup, and he just looked miserable. And I went over and talked to him for a few minutes. And I don't remember why, but I quoted to him from Philippians 4. And this is one of the things that makes me think of this quite often is because I try to live by this particular verse. This verse is so important for every Christian to be able to keep in mind and to develop, being able to maybe memorize this line. But we'll pick up, and this is Philippians chapter 4 and verse 10. But we're going to read a little past verse 10. It says, "But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at last you have revived your concern for me." And this being Paul. Paul is grateful for people's concern about him. He says, he says, "Indeed, you were concerned before, but you lacked opportunity." And this is the verse I remember. It says, "Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am." Just how content are you? Does that mean you just stand still, take the car out of gear, and just park? But what about the certain circumstances that we live through life? I mean, life is perfect, isn't it? No one ever gets hurt, scratched, gets sick. Has everybody got a couple of $1 billion in the bank? Notice the little allusion to when I was a kid, $1 million is a lot of money. These days, maybe not so much. But nevertheless, verse 11 again, "Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity." Boy, you turn on the TV these days, and what do we hear? Prosperity, all this. Everyone's TV's full of glitz. Unless you watch some news, you see kind of the opposite of everything. It says, I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. And then he gives a supporting statement for why he's that way. He says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Nevertheless, you have done well to share with me in my affliction. That's one of the things that we come to church for, as fellow church members. Do we just turn a blind eye whenever they're in bad circumstances? Or do you try to step up and help a little bit? Or help a lot? Or do you just turn a blind eye to things? So, I read this for the lesson that's coming, for us to kind of keep this in mind. But do you find a certain calm in looking far ahead in your life, past the end of your life, to a certain circumstance where you find comfort in that? In the comfort of, why am I suffering so much? What is the suffering all about? So if we go back to Psalms 8, and I'm just going to drop down just a little bit, and we'll just pick up in verse 3. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man that you take thought of him? You think about that. That's a pretty stout statement. What is man that you take thought of him? And the Son of Man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than God, and you crown him with glory and majesty. You make him to rule over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet. What is it that you take thought of him? What is supposed to be the crowning achievement? He even states this elsewhere in Scripture. What is the crowning achievement of God's creation? The physical creation. What is that? Well, you're one of them. Mankind. Okay? That is the pinnacle. You think about this. I think about cows, butterflies, bugs, all manner of living things. But do they ever get outside of what they actually were designed to do? Is a deer always a deer? Is a hippopotamus always a hippopotamus? Do they do things that hippopotamuses are supposed to do? Why don't they deviate from that? But then you have mankind. And we've been given something that the animals haven't. We've been given something called free will, the ability to choose. Okay? What do we do with that ability? And that's the thing that we have to work on. What do we do with our choice? And do I have to say it again? Well, maybe not, but I will. The whole time you're here, you're creating a living testament, or a testament that will be judged as to whether or not you will be judged as a good, faithful servant, or someone that you couldn't be trusted. Someone couldn't trust you with that.
Mm-hmm. DNA, and how complex it is, and some people say, well, that just happened accidentally. You see how complex it is?
Yeah. Well, for the non-believers, they're starting to put faith in this thing called CRISPR now, where they can manipulate the DNA strands. And they're doing it with bugs and things like that already. And I've heard that they're messing with fetuses now with those sort of things. Sometimes you think, gee whiz, is mankind trying to step in and supplant himself as creator? That's just something for you to think about. So with all these thoughts in mind, what is it that God pays attention to us about? Well, I thought about this a lot, and there's one thing that absolutely is one of the reasons why you're here this morning. And it's the word faith. F-A-I-T-H, faith. So, and you know me and about my thing about definition of words. So Merriam-Webster had a pretty good explanation for what faith is. Faith is a noun, person, place, or a thing, right? It says here in part 1, there's like 4 parts to what they give for a definition of this. It says it's an allegiance to duty or a person. Allegiance to a person, duty or a person. Well, they give the example of loyalty. Loyalty. And the example they state is lost faith in the leader. How many of you in here have ever worked in some place and after a while you get to thinking, I got to know what he's talking about. Look at what he's doing to this company. Look at this. You lose faith in the leader. For those of you that have been baptized for a long, long time, have you lost faith? I would suggest to you that more than likely not, or you wouldn't have your body in here. Youngsters, that's a whole other thing. You got the entire world telling you right now that there is no God. You're just being a fool to think otherwise. So the second part of the word faith is fidelity to one's promises, sincerity of intentions. That word, acted in good faith. Acted in good faith. What do we do with politicians that don't act in good faith? Well, these days we just sit back and let them do whatever they want.
We elect them.
Yeah, I mean, we allow ourselves to be fooled by these people. But how many other people get fooled? How about yourself? You got to be very careful with these sort of things. Second part of this is fidelity to one's promises, sincerity of intentions, acted in good faith. And the second part, sorry, I repeated myself. It says second part, a belief and trust in and loyalty to God. Dictionary definition. I'll repeat it again. A belief and trust in loyalty to God. So, when does your loyalty end? When you're screaming and cursing at that person that almost hit you in your car? You're shaking your fist at them, yelling stuff at them? Where does loyalty to God end? You have to be very careful with that, don't we? That falls under the heading of self-control. Well, why have self-control? So, the second part of this part of the definition is a belief in traditional doctrines of religion. Doctrines of religion. Well, who develops these doctrines? Mankind. What is this? What's the situation? I watched some videos earlier this week about I watched this one about this famous movie actor. Gosh, he was a young kid. What was his name? I can't remember why he died, but he was raised by parents that believed that don't teach them anything, just let them run wild. And they did. And I'll remember the kid's name here in just a minute. He was real famous back in the 90s. And in some way he died. I finally got tired. It's a 2.5-hour video, and I got tired of it about an hour in. I said, I had enough of all this. I'll say his name. Maybe in a minute it'll come to me. But you think, belief in a traditional doctrine of religion. What do you do if you've got someone that does not teach his kid or their kid anything? They just come up and they just... And this goes back into the late 60s or, these were like hippie kids. And there were a lot of kids like that. So a third part of this, in faith, it says a firm belief in something for which there is no proof. What does the world tell you about the Bible? They pick and pick and pick at it, hoping to find something that says there's no proof in here. There's no proofs whatsoever. How do you argue against that? Are you equipped to argue against that? Sometimes the answer for yourself is fairly brutal. Can I say anything that will stand up against the heat of this particular argument they're presenting to me? Has anybody in here ever gone around with pure atheists? Sometimes these atheists are pretty sharp people, and I tell you what, they'll hit you up, they'll blindside you on things. They'll make you think. What am I actually believing here? So unless you sit and you can contemplate what this thing actually is teaching, you're going to wind up with someone with a really sharp mind. I'm not going to say that they're stupid, except maybe in one particular instance, one very important instance. But how do you defend the faith? Well, one is your life, the way you live it. But as the other, how can you defend against someone that tells you flat out there is no God? Well, again, a firm belief in something for while there is no proof. How many people do we know that got up, maybe were baptized, and a year or two later, 6 months later, 5 years later, 10 years later, hadn't set foot in the door of a church in a long, long time? They've convinced themselves that, why bother? It's no big deal. I'm just going to die. A second little part of this third thing was a complete trust. Now, I think most of us in here should have a complete trust in what God's told us He's going to do for us at the end of our lives. Number 4 is something that is believed, especially with strong conviction, especially a system of religious beliefs. How many people in here have you had one of your friends say to you, "Oh, you Church of Christ people, lighten up a little bit. You're too strict"? You ever had that one thrown in your face? I have a couple of times. Especially when it comes to the thing about baptism. All you got to do is believe. That's it. Nothing else.
Unless you want to argue with Jesus at the end of Mark, I think it is. What's the other one?
Unless you believe and are baptized. See, the belief leads you to the baptismal. And baptism may be symbolic and maybe in our minds, but it's not to our Creator. Because He said, "I'm not going to allow someone with sin to approach me." So,
I read a book just recently that said, it would be baptism, all right, but just wait till Pentecost.
no. Yeah. So, if you've got your Bibles or your phone with the Bible built into it, turn to Hebrews 11. And I'm just going to read just a little bit of Hebrews 11 because we want to go past 11 fairly quickly and go to 12. And this is devoted to being a direct reading, okay? Rather than me just blathering on about some of my ideas, but this is a direct reading from Scripture. And I'm reading from the New American Standard. It says here, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the men of old gained approval." In verse 3, "By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible." That last statement, he's saying he can speak something into existence. Well, to speak something into existence means that he had to think it up, right? Power of thought. He demonstrates the power of thought right there. Okay? What does the power of thought do for us? How guarded are we with our thought? The power of thought. You think about that for a minute. By faith, we understand that the worlds were prepared by the Word of God. What's the first two words in this statement? By faith. We take it at face value because how do we know? We've been given this book that says it's so. So you go back to the faith, and one of the explanations in it is you take faith in something that's, again, I'll read it again. Firm belief in something for which there is no proof. Now, how can you prove that there is a God when you're standing in a total physical world? How do you do that? Well, one, you can point to yourself. The miracle of taking dirt and turning it into a living being. You can take the animal kingdom, and that you're at the top of the animal kingdom. Then you've been given the ability to think and make decisions. Again, you think this full circle, and it all comes back to, are you worthy? Are you worthy to live in the existence, permanent existence after you've died? It comes full circle for you. It is that simple if you just stop to think about it. But atheists, they just think, live a little while, then dead. Party full blast until the end of my life. What's the point? Well, he had a good time while he was alive. So, with this, if you continue in Hebrews 11, it takes off and it goes from Genesis almost to the end of the Old Testament. So in verse 39, this is Hebrews 11 and 39. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, because what he was giving was examples in between these statements. He's giving examples of all the people that used their faith and applied it. And he gives this, and he makes this statement. And all these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised. What? What's going on here? A little bit more of a little tincture of an explanation. And because God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they would not be made perfect. Well, you may think, well, gee whiz, what happened to all the Old Testament people? How are they going to be judged? The same way we will be. But we've got an extra chance at this. There's something was introduced in this was grace. And remember, this was predicted from the very beginning of the Bible. Okay? And this is a personal opinion I'm going to say here, but I'm thinking that the Old Testament was given to us time and time again, over and over and over. How many times did men fail? How many times did men find approval with God? Over and over and over. Even the Jews would fail. They'd flail around. And what happened with the people that had to wander around for 40 years? They weren't out of captivity very long before they said, put us back in captivity. What? You begged me to get you out. Now you want me to put you back. What kind of reasoning is that? But here, we have a choice here, and it's because of grace. So, the entirety of chapter 12 goes through to explain some of this. So let's just start on this. It'll probably be next week before we can wind this up. And I'm not going to get into a lot of great elaboration and explanations on a lot of this. Let's let the Bible speak, the way it's supposed to be done. It's Hebrews 12, verse 1. Therefore, and he's referring back to everything that was given as examples in chapter 11. Chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. What has just been stated here? For those of us that live to an old age, it's a race of endurance. And anytime I make that statement, I think about my young friend at the age of 14 years old, killed himself on a motorcycle. It was an accident. But his race was cut short, very, very short. And people will say, oh, well, why did God let that happen? I have no idea. I'm not one of those people that believes that God puts his finger on your top of your head and guides you around on this chessboard. Why else would you have the ability to choose? Because if that's the case, if you choose wrongly, well, do you blame God? See what happens there when you get into that line of thinking. The way you're guided is through the learning and the use of this. This empowers your brain to make the right choice. Read this again. Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. Turn on the TV and watch some of the ads on TV. What does your mind think when you see something up there that 40 years ago that would have never made it past the censors? And even before that, our good senses, we didn't even need censors. Because we were our own censors. We knew what was good and what was bad. What should be presented to us. For those of you that were here, remember when we watched the Three Little Pigs? What was presented to us? The battle of good and evil. It was a simple story, but it illustrated a very good concept. There's no such thing as a shortcut in this sort of a situation, okay? Let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. For those of you that know me, you know I make a living from racing engines. And one of the ultimate tests in racing engines is what they call endurance racing. And one of the ultimate tests is the 24 hours of Le Mans. Running an engine as hard and as fast as it will go for 24 solid hours. Well, almost. Pit stops and those sort of things. But what an incredible task to take an engine and just literally beat it up for 24 hours. And it survives the test. But what happens to the ones that didn't get out of the test labs? Some of the engine manufacturers said, well, it's expensive to test an engine for 24 hours. And it is. It's a great expense. And what happens if it breaks and you want to win the race and you're still in the test labs? Well, you got to go back and figure out why it broke, and you spend more and more money, manpower, and time. Well, you can relate this to the way we live our lives. How often do you fail? Do you go back to the basic lab and say, how do I fix this? How do I put a stop to this? One of the failures in some of these engines is something called a connecting rod. I won't get into the explanation of it, but when one of those things breaks, it's a catastrophic failure. What would you do, and I'm going to be pretty explicit on this, what would you do if you saw the preacher at your church coming out of a den of prostitution? Was he in there preaching, or what was he in there doing? What image forms in your mind right there? What do you think about the Creator? How would that be judged? We have to be very, very careful with this. Okay? Because I'll say it myself. Sometimes I find myself being a very big hypocrite. And I want to kick my tail as soon as I've done something like that. You have regrets on your behavior. So, and the sin which so easily entangles us, it entices us. How hard is it to turn your head away from that TV? when they're showing things now. I can't believe some of the advertisements they're showing now. It's unbelievable. I just got to where what little bit of TV I get to watch, I just change the channel. I don't even want to hear it. I don't want to see it. But why don't I get on the phone and complain to the people that are sponsoring these sort of things? Bud Light got their tail in a twist, didn't they? And what happened? The public had the courage to speak up. But you speak up in an intelligent way. You don't have to be calling people names and all that sort of thing, but you can do things intelligently. So to continue, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. In other words, it's fixed. You don't get around it. Life is given to you for a reason. The race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. God took on the form of a man, and he passed his own test. He passed his own test. A lot of people sit and wonder, and I have for years and years, what was the purpose of this? He showed, here's the test. I'm going to put myself in the life situation, and I'm going to live it. And how close did Jesus actually come? Remember in the garden, he said, if this cup can be passed from me. Because he knew he was fixing to go through excruciating pain. Humiliation was there in the middle of it also. And possibly the situation of, gee whiz, God, did you make a mistake by making mankind? There's all sorts of questions that can be asked. But Jesus lived it, and he passed the test.
Two or three times with Moses, he was ready to get rid of all of them.
Oh yeah. You just if you're on, and there's a lot of people in this country today that would love to get rid of people like us in this church right now. Just they wouldn't bat an eye to just kill you and get rid of you. And if you think I'm crazy for saying something like that, I suggest you study about the Chinese communists. Read about the fascist Germans and look at the communists that were in, let's say, the Bolshevik Revolution that lasted about 70 years and how many people were murdered with absolutely no afterthought whatsoever. They're no good. They're useless. Get rid of them. Now, what kind of thinking is that? So, what's being taught here is the total opposite. So in verse 3, for consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Let me remind you of the statement I made earlier. How many people do we know that have been baptized and they no longer come here? They fell away from it. I don't need to go to church. I'm fine. Well, part of the reason why you're here is to help in everybody's faith. That's one of the main things. If you see someone that might be slipping on the backside of something, go talk to them a little bit. Remind them of things. That's one of the things that we should be doing. Verse 3 again, for consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Verse 4, you have not resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against him, and you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. And this is a referral to Proverbs 3:11 and Proverbs 3:12. He says, my son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. Again, when you've done something you know you're not supposed to do, how does this operate in your mind? Should not your mind be the whip, so to speak, to bring you back into line? Stop it. You won't get the prize You won't get what's been promised to you unless you stop it. John warns us, you just can't keep on asking for grace, doing the same thing over and over and over. At some point, you have to stop. And that brings up the other one. If nothing changes, nothing changes. And there's that word if. If nothing changes, nothing changes. So in other words, you have to change, you have to stop that in order to make the change. So in verse 7, it is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? I just remembered the guy's name, that actor's name, River Phoenix. And River Phoenix, if you want to watch a documentary that just documents how parents just literally abandoned a kid, and then you see the succeeding life that he lived. This is tragic. I don't even know how the man died, but he was a young man, and it's pretty tragic watching this stuff. That's why I just finally got my fill of watching it and turned it off. So, and for those of us that are parents, it is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? Verse 10, for they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share his holiness. Verse 11, and I've got this one underlined. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. That's what discipline is after. Don't steal. Don't lie. Don't cheat. That's one of the things that's being lost. It seems like it's being totally lost in the nation right now. We've gone from a nation that pretty much could live by itself without a lot of laws and rules, and now what do we got? Entire divisions of government that sit around and don't do anything but think up laws and regulations for us to fail. What has it been said? Every citizen in the United States will usually break at least 3 federal laws every day. Laws we don't even know exist, that could potentially be put to use against us. And these are basic laws that were given a long time ago, by this supposedly non-existent God. So I'll stop right there. We'll pick up next week. But you may ponder this question: who do you serve? Self or God? Because that's what it's going to boil down to. I gave you a lifetime. Who did you serve? Did you choose to follow what I told you to? Or did you just run rampant and just live any old way you wanted to? If I've said anything in error, please let me know. Thank you.